Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and boy do I have an exciting video for you guys today. Logic Pro for iPad is finally here. Apple announced iPad versions of Logic Pro and Final Cut Pro earlier this month, and now that they're finally here, I'm gonna give you a flyover of all of the main sort of need-to-know topics and features in Logic Pro for iPad. Now, one question I want to answer right up front, because I know a lot of people will have this question: is Logic Pro for iPad the same thing as Logic Pro for Mac, or is it some dumbed down version with limited features? The vast majority of the most common functions you'll use in Logic on a Mac are in the iPad version as well. So you can make beats with the step sequencer, you can download all of the same sound library content, use loops, samples, record MIDI, use software instruments, you can hook up a MIDI controller, you can hook up an audio interface and make recordings with a microphone or a DI instrument like guitar or bass. You can write automation, you can mix, you can load MIDI and audio effects, you can use live loops, you can bounce your projects, and you can even share projects back and forth between your Mac and your iPad. It is its own app, and functionally there are many things about Logic Pro for iPad that are different than the Mac version, but it's still very intuitive to use, and if you're a regular Logic Pro user on Mac, you'll be able to pick up and use Logic Pro for iPad fairly easily. Now, with that said, there are some features that have been consolidated or changed to fit the iPad, touch format. In particular, the edit tools, the browser and library have been combined on the iPad version into a single browser, and most of the plugins have a more generic look to them in order to make sure that they're more accessible for tapping with your fingers rather than clicking with a mouse. But everything in Logic Pro for iPad has been optimized for touch control. There are also two new plugins in Logic for iPad, Breaker and Sample Alchemy, which both take tactile sound design to the next level, and I'll demonstrate both of these plugins in this video as well. Okay, so now that I've wrapped up the introduction, let me give you a walkthrough of all of the main features in Logic Pro for iPad. This video will probably be kind of long, so I've added chapters to this video below so you can jump straight to the feature you want to see, and you can skip features that you don't want to see. So let's get right into this. Logic Pro for iPad is available on the App Store on a subscription plan for $49 US per year or $4.99 per month. Now, I know a lot of people really hate subscription plans, but personally for this, I don't mind it. And I'll be honest, the iPad version of Logic is probably not something I'm going to use every day. This is something I would use on the fly when I'm traveling or doing site recordings or doing live recordings. So I actually like the monthly plan because I can cancel it when I'm not using it and then restart the subscription when I actually need to use it. Logic Pro for iPad requires iPad OS 16.4 or later, with an iPad that has an Apple A12 Bionic chip or later. Additional peripherals like the Magic Keyboard and Apple Pencil are not required, but they do speed up my workflow because some Mac shortcuts are still here in the iPad version, so it's nice to have the keyboard for those. And I also like editing MIDI notes with the Apple Pencil. It's really great for, fine-tuning velocities and fine-tuning the trimming of MIDI notes in the MIDI editor. You can connect any generic USB MIDI device to the iPad, so this includes most MIDI controllers. You can also connect any core audio device, so most USB audio interfaces should work as well. I'll be using my Apogee Symphony desktop and Alesis V25 MIDI controller throughout this video, and I'm hooking these up using a third-party USB-C adapter I found on Amazon. Okay, so after downloading Logic Pro for iPad from the App Store, I'm going to go ahead and just open it up. Here in this landing page, you'll find all of your recent projects, but you can also create a new project from here. You just click the plus button here, and then it's going to ask you, do you want a new empty project for tracks or for live loops? Now, for this video, I'm just going to focus on using the tracks functions since that's what most people are using. But Logic Pro for iPad does have a fully functioning version of live loops, and this is fantastic if you're going to take the iPad around for live performance, DJing, etc. So let's create a new empty tracks project. It's going to ask you what type of track you want to create. One thing you'll notice is that MIDI and pattern regions have been split up into two different types of tracks. So now you have a dedicated MIDI track for software instruments and a dedicated pattern track also for software instruments. And then you have your typical audio tracks and drummer tracks as well. I'm going to start with a pattern track. And the next thing I really want to do here is I want to set up my audio interface. So I have my audio interface and MIDI controller plugged into this USB adapter. This is just a third-party adapter I found on Amazon. It was pretty cheap. Really, this is the only way you're going to be able to hook up both a MIDI controller and your audio interface at the same time. Now, to set that up, you're going to go up to the three dots up here in the upper right corner, and then open up your settings. And then under App Settings, you can go to Audio, and then here you can select your audio interface. So for my input and output, I'm using the Symphony Desktop. You can also set things like your I/O buffer here. I'm going to leave it at 128 for now. And then if you want to check your MIDI controller, just go to MIDI, and you'll see the MIDI controller plugged in. So this is my Alesis V25. Okay, so now that that's set up, I'll play in a few notes in my step sequencer here. And sure enough, I'm getting sound. Now, the way the interface is arranged, you have your editors down here on the bottom. You have your browser inspector and channel strip fader here on the left. You have your play surfaces on the lower right. So this is things like your beat pads and your keyboards. And so if I want to close out this editor here for the step sequencer, I can just click here. If I want to close out the browser, I can click here. And to zoom in Logic Pro for iPad, you simply apply a two-finger pinch, zoom in or out vertically. You can also zoom in or out horizontally. And then just to navigate around, you just use a one-finger touch and you can scroll around. All your transport controls are up at the top, although if you have a Magic Keyboard, you can still use spacebar to stop and start playback. Okay, so now that we've got our peripherals up and running and a new Logic project created, let's make a beat with the step sequencer and explore some sounds in the sound library. When I started using the step sequencer in Logic Remote, I fell in love with the ability to just be able to tap in notes with my fingers instead of clicking things in with the mouse. It just expedites the entire beat making process, and having this be a native feature built right into Logic for iPad is so amazing. So let's explore some sounds and make a beat. Okay, so let's make a beat. I don't want this drum kit. So what I'm going to do is click here to open up the browser. And I'll go back here so you can see the main page of the browser. So the browser is kind of like the loop browser plus the sound library combined into one single browser. So this is where you can pull up different instrument patches, audio patches, loops, samples, plugin presets, etc. You can even access the sound library from here as well. So if you find that when you download Logic for iPad for the first time, the number of sounds is limited. However, if you want to download more sounds, you just click Get More Sounds here. And this will bring you to the Logic sound library page where you can download different sound packs, different producer packs, instrument packs, drummers and kits, etc. For now, I don't really need this, but one other thing I'll show you is if you click Manage Packs up here, you can see all of the packs that you've downloaded and all the ones that you haven't downloaded. So all available packs are 14 gigabytes, and I've only installed about 5 gigabytes of those. So I'm going to click Done to get back to Logic, and I'm going to go to Instrument Patches, and what I want are some drums. Now, one way to do this is you just click Search, and you can type up what you want. So I could type up drums, and then you can choose other modifiers. So I could choose full kit, I could choose electronic music, and then this will give me a set of instrument presets I can pick from. Another way to do this, if I clear all here, is click here. This will show you all of the modifiers or the filters. So once again, I'll choose drums, I'll choose electronic, and the one I'm going to go with is this one called Big Room. And then I can just close out those filters. So I can click there to audition it, or I can click and hold and drag and drop this on top of my existing track. Now, if you want to delete an existing pattern region, you simply just tap on the region, then tap again, and you'll get this dialog that pops up. It's almost like your right-click function, and then you can delete it. And then if I want to move the playhead around, I can do that. So let's set the playhead back to the beginning. Now what I'll do is tap here, and I can create new MIDI regions, pattern regions, or drummer regions. So I'm going to create a new pattern region. You simply select the region, and then you click here to open up the editor associated with that region. Another way to do this is you can tap and then tap again, and then you can click Edit and then Show in Editor. Now, each of the editors are going to have this option in the upper right corner that will allow you to sort of maximize that editor. You can click again to minimize it, but you can also manually drag the editor to resize it. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to set the cycle range around this region so that I can loop it. So to do that, you just tap on it, go to cycle, and then you can set a selection or rounded selection. And now when I press play, the cycle range will loop that region. And the C shortcut, if you're using the Magic Keyboard, also works here. Okay, so let's enter in some notes. Now, if you're scrolling through all of the different rows in the step sequencer, you're going to want to do it over here on the left side. Otherwise, you're going to accidentally enter in a bunch of notes. But what you can also do if you want to see more rows is you can click here, and this will sort of collapse the rows down into a smaller view. So let's create just a basic 4 on the floor pattern. Just like that. And we'll add in some snares. Let's add in some claps. Now, if I want to adjust the velocity in the step sequencer, all of your edit modes are up here. So on-off is just turning the steps on or off. I can click the next one, and that's velocity. Now, this is, again, where I find the Apple Pencil really useful, is for making fine adjustments in the editors. So maybe I'll just do something like that. Now, let's say I want to extend or change the length of the pattern. I can come up to length here, and I can make this any number of steps I want. So let's make this 32 steps. So here are my first 16, then here are my second 16. In my first 16, I'm going to go back to on-off mode and turn a couple of these off. So now this is my pattern. Okay, cool. So now what I'm going to do is close out the editor, and let's say I want to take this beat and move it over. One thing you can do is you can just use the trim tool here that's sort of built into the region to extend the region. There is also a cycle or loop mode up here where you can loop regions, but for the step sequencer, we're not necessarily going to do that. So I'm going to go back to the trim tool, but I do want to copy and paste this over because I want to use this as the basis for another beat that starts at bar 5. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can tap on this, go to edit, and then you can choose to repeat the region. You can also select the region, tap again, hit copy, set the playhead where you want it to go, and then tap here and select paste at playhead. So that's another way to go about it. But for these step sequencer pattern regions, you can actually just trim them out, and it just extends the range of the pattern. So let's open this one up in the editor, and let's add a harder kick drum. Let's remove those other ones. Just like in Logic for Mac, you can click and swipe to enter in notes in a sequence, just like so. Let's go back to this one. Let's remove these. Let's add 4 more up here. Okay, so in this one, I want some hi-hats. Now, there are other edit modes up here at the top of the step sequencer. So just like in the Mac version of Logic, you have velocity, you have gate, you have tie, note pitch, octave. And if you want to access the rest of the edit functions, you click here. And then we have note repeat, loop, chance, offset, step rate, and skip. The one I want to use is repeat. And again, using my Apple Pencil, this is really nifty. I can add in those little extra note repeats wherever I want. I can do 2s, I can do 3s. And if you want, you can also use the E shortcut, just like in Logic for Mac, to hide or show the editors. Incorporating loops and samples is super easy in Logic Pro for iPad. Simply find the sound that you want and then tap and hold and drag the sound into the tracks area. So let's add some new sounds to our beat, and I'll also show you how to use the inspector to modify and transpose regions in the tracks area. Okay, so let's add a loop to this. So again, instead of using a separate loop browser, you're just going to go over into the main browser here. I can clear my previous filters and I can search for something else. And again, I can go back and I can say, okay, I just want loops this time. Let's try out this Chimes of Utopia. So again, you just click on the icon on the left side of the loop to audition it. Okay, that one's nice. And what I'll do is just press and hold and then drag it into my project. Now, as long as you have the trim tool pulled up, you can trim any of these loops as well. So if I want to make that just a 4-bar region, I can totally do that. And then let's say I want this loop over here at bar 5 as well. So I can hold Option, I can drag this over, or I can use the copy and repeat functions I showed you earlier. Now, let's say that I want the transposition of this region to be different in the first sort of intro here, bars 1 through 4, than I want for the rest of the song. Let's say that I want this to be up an octave, or maybe I want to transpose it to another key. What you can do is you click the I button down here, and this opens up the inspector. Now, this inspector, just like in the Mac version of Logic, can be a region inspector or a track inspector. So in region mode, if you select a region, this will show you various information about that region. So if I want this to be up an octave, I can open up my General tab in the region inspector, and I can pull up the transposition in semitones. So going up 1 octave would be plus 12. Other things you can do is you can select a region, you can change the name of the region, you can change the color if you want. I'll go ahead and do that for these here. I'll just give them a different color than the other track there. You can mute them, you can loop them to the end of the project, you can adjust the velocity, you can add a delay, you can play with the dynamics. Now let's say I want to add one more loop. So I'm going to go back to my browser, and this time I'm going to search up a shaker, because I want a shaker loop. Let's try this one, driving fast shaker. Press and hold, drag it in. Let's add it right here at bar 5. And let's loop this one. So I'm going to choose the loop tool up here, select the region, loop that out once, and then I can go back to trim mode, set the playhead over here, and let's see what this sounds like. Now, if I want to pull the volume of this down, I can pull it down here. You can also do it in the mixer, but we'll come back to the mixer. But there's also an additional channel strip you can pull up by clicking here. And this pulls up a channel strip that shows the level, the pan, the solo, and mute for the channel that you have selected. Very similar to the channel strip that's in the inspector in the Mac version of Logic. So maybe I want to pull my shaker down. pan it, and if you double tap, this will take you back to center. Now in Logic for Mac, there's a function that's called convert loops to regions, or I think it used to be called convert loops to real copies. You can do the same thing here in Logic Pro for iPad. Just tap on the region, go to convert, and you can select convert loops to regions. So now I have 2 real copies of this loop. Let's add one more sound in here. This time I'm going to go with a sample, and I'm going to search up white noise because I want sort of like a white noise crash effect. Let's click and hold on that, drag it in right there. Now, this is like sort of like a reverse crash. What I want to do is I want to reverse this clip so it actually sounds like a crash. This is more of like a build-up sweeper. So what you can do is you select that region, open the inspector, and once again, you can view all of the parameters for this region. So I'm going to go to General, and one of the options here is Reverse. So you can reverse the playback of regions just like you can in Logic Pro for Mac. Now, this isn't quite in the right place at the moment. And if I pull this over, it's going to snap to the grid by default, and I'm not really going to be able to get it exactly where I want it to go. So let's go ahead and turn off the grid snap. You click the snap option up here, and then you turn off snap to grid, and now I can freely move this region around. So what I'll do is I'm going to try to get this right here, right on bar 5. Now let's say I want to add a fade to this. I'm going to go ahead and trim that up a bit, select the region, go into the region inspector, and there's an option for fade start and fade end. So I'm going to open up my fade end option and then click on time, and you can either type in the value you want or you can just drag up or down. I want a fade that's a little more than a second long, so I'll enter 1200, and there's my fade. Logic Pro for iPad has all of the same MIDI sequencing functions you're already used to using on your Mac. It is a fully functioning piano roll style MIDI editor where you can enter notes, quantize, and edit velocity. And as I mentioned earlier, you can hook up just about any USB MIDI controller and record MIDI as well. All of the instruments from Logic Pro for Mac are available in Logic Pro for iPad. Now, what I will say is that the interfaces for some of these instruments are much simpler than their Mac counterparts. So if you need to do some really fine, detailed synthesis and modulation and programming work, you might want to do that on a Mac. For example, Alchemy, which is a super complex instrument with a ton of modulation controls, is much more simplified in the iPad version. All of the sounds and presets are there, you just have less control over some of the modulation parameters in the iPad version. However, if you move a project over to your Mac, you'll get all of those controls back, and then if you move the project back to the iPad, this locks in those controls so the sounds are exactly the same, regardless of whether you're working on your Mac or on your iPad. So let's add an additional Alchemy instrument to our project, and I'll show you how to write an automation with Alchemy's XY transform pad. Next, I want to add a bass to this, and I want to use my own software instrument and play it in with my MIDI controller. So to do that, I'm going to click here to create a new track. This time I'm going to create a MIDI track, and by default, this will pull up an electric piano, just like in Logic for Mac. Okay, so for this track, I need a bass instrument. So I'm going to go ahead and use my filters to search up a bass. And let's try this breaking bass. Okay, that's pretty cool. Press and hold, drag it on top of the track, and now I have my bass instrument. Drop down an octave. Now this instrument, if you open up the plugin tiles editor here, that's this middle button here, this will show you the signal chain of that entire track, including the instrument, any MIDI effects that came before it, and any audio effects that came after it. So this is an Alchemy patch, and the instrument tile, the plugin tile, shows you all of the essential controls for that particular instrument or effect. So I can actually use the XY pad here to change the tone, just like you could with the Transform XY pad and Alchemy in Logic for Mac. Now, first we need to record in our MIDI, but in just a bit, I'm going to show you how to record this as automation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the playhead over here, and I'm going to record in a bass line starting at measure 5. You can hit R to record on the keyboard, or you can hit the record button up here. And there we go. So I can trim this up. I can just tap on it, trim that up. And then what I can do is I can edit this in the MIDI editor. So just select the region, open up the editor, and this opens up a fully functioning piano roll style editor. So for this bass line I played in, I believe a 16th note is going to be the best quantization value. So to quantize, you pull up the inspector. And in Logic Pro for iPad, the inspector handles all of the quantization. There isn't a separate inspector for the piano roll. It's all done here in the region inspector. You can still select just certain notes and just quantize those notes, but the way it's handled is all in the region inspector. So if I go to quantize here, I can choose my quantization value. So I can click here and set this to a 16th note. And now all of the notes have been quantized to a 16th note. Okay, so just like with the tracks editor, there's a set of tools just for the MIDI editor. So you have the trim tool, which you can select notes with, and you can trim them. So if I wanted to make these notes a little longer, a little shorter, you can do that. There's also a separate grid snap for the MIDI editor, so you can turn this on or off if you like. And this is really where I find the Apple Pencil is really helpful, because some of these like little time handles and things like that are kind of hard to work with your finger, especially if you have fat fingers like me. But you can go through and you can really get in here and fine tune and fine detail edit your MIDI recordings. And there are other tools too. So, you know, you have your pencil tool where you can enter notes. You can click again to remove the note. You can use the brush tool to enter in a whole sequence of notes. Then you have a velocity tool where you can adjust the velocity of each note. But I think I'm going to use a MIDI effects plugin to deal with my velocity to get all of the velocities the same. So I'm going to leave that alone for now. But before I start adding a bunch of effects, what I want to do is I want to write in some automation from the XY transform pad in Alchemy. So how do you do this? Well, you just click here to pull up your automation. You change your automation mode to a live automation mode, so I can choose touch and latch. I'll use latch. I'll set the playhead back here before the region. And if I want a bigger view of Alchemy here, I can tap on that, and it'll bring up a full view of Alchemy. And again, as I said before, the interface for Alchemy is much more simplified in Logic Pro for iPad, because there's just a ton of modulation controls that, you know, they can't fit in here and are just not, you know, conducive to using your finger. So if you create a patch here and you bring it over to Logic for Mac, you'll get all of those controls back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move around the XY pad here. And you can do this with your finger, or you can do it with the Apple Pencil. And because I have a live automation mode turned on, all I have to do is press play, and then I can write in that automation. And now that I'm done, I can close out Alchemy. I can turn off my automation. Now, you don't want to turn it off. You want to put it in read mode, because you want the automation to still be read. And let's go ahead and listen to that. And in fact, if you click there, you can go back to your tiles view we can see the automation that I wrote in. And then to hide automation, you click here to go back to your normal regions view. Just about all of the MIDI and audio effects from Logic for Mac are available in Logic for iPad. Just like the instruments, these can be loaded up as plugin tiles, which give you a compact view of each plugin and puts the most essential controls right in front of you, so you don't have to open up the plugin every time to use it. Let's add some MIDI effects and audio effects to our project. So let's say that I want to add like an arpeggiator to my bass here, just to give it some more motion. When you open up the tiles here, you can click to add a new MIDI effect. So you'll see that all of the MIDI effects from Logic for Mac are all here, including the scripter. So let's pull up the arpeggiator. And just like with Alchemy, there's going to be sort of like a condensed view of it here in the plugin tile. But if you click on it, this will open up the full view and you get the full features. If you click here, there are plugin presets as well. So if you click show presets, you can view all of the plugin presets that you have in Logic for Mac as well. So these are the same as the menu at the top of the plugin in Logic for Mac. I'm just going to use the default setting, but I am going to use a custom grid pattern here. So I'll go to App Patterns, and I'll use this one called Grooving Pulse 1. And to deal with the fact that I've got a bunch of different velocities, I'm going to add another MIDI effect. I'm going to use the velocity processor. Here I'm going to use the range mode, and I'm just going to fix all of my velocities to one setting. I'll set it to around 100. So now all of my velocities will be 100. So just like in Logic for Mac, you can stack up multiple MIDI effects to create your own custom MIDI effects chains. Now let's say we wanted to add an audio effect. Maybe I wanted to add an EQ to one of my instruments. I'm going to go to the Big Room drum track, click Audio Effects, and then all of your audio effects from Logic for Mac are here. I'm going to go to EQ. Let's pull up the channel EQ. And the channel EQ in Logic for iPad is basically identical to the version on Mac. And you can bypass the plugin in the upper left here, so you can hear the before and after. If I want to go back, I can add another plugin. Maybe I want to add a bit of saturation to this. I'll go to distortion. I'll pull up the clip distortion. So these plugin tiles are really nifty because they show you just the essential controls. You can control some of those features here, and you can even bypass the plugins from the plugin tiles. Logic Pro for iPad has a fully functioning mixer where you can load up effects, add sends, adjust volume levels, adjust the pan, and much more. Let's use the mixer to adjust some levels in our project, add audio effects, and use an effects send to create a common aux track for time-based effects. So I'll click here to open up the mixer, and you can scroll up and see all of your MIDI effects, your instruments, your output settings, your audio effects, automation modes, pan, volume. Let's set some levels for these instruments because I think I'm clipping in a couple of spots. Now, if you want to select multiple channels, you can click this button right here. This is essentially the same thing as holding Shift. So you click here, you select the channels that you want to select, and then what you do is you can pull down all of those channels at the same time, and then deselect. And just like in Logic Pro for Mac, your drum machine designer kits are in track stacks. So you can open up those track stacks here, and you can set the levels of the individual channels inside of the track stack. There's also a meter bridge up here, so when you are working with lots of channels, you can swipe left and right, and you can easily access all of those channels. So for example, there's a hi-hat in this beat. Let's say I want that to be more on the left, and then I want my shaker to be more on the right. I can totally do that. And with the pan knobs, you can drag them here, but if you need a bigger view, you just click, then you'll get a larger sized pan knob, and you can adjust one value at a time as well. And if you want to add effects from here, you can. What you do is you click on this plus button, and it goes to setup mode, which allows you to add additional effects, including MIDI effects. So for example, for my shaker, maybe I want to add a reverb. I can just click on audio effects. I can go down to reverb, and I can select that reverb, click on the plugin, show details, and it opens up that plugin here in the plugin editor. So this is Chromaverb, but I don't want to use Chromaverb like this. I'm actually going to put it on a send. I'm actually going to put it on an aux track and use a send to bus over to it, because I want to use Chromaverb for multiple different tracks. So let's go ahead and do that. Let me show you how to create aux tracks and sends. So here's the shaker track. Here's the send. You click on that, and then you choose what bus you want to use. So I'm going to select Create New Bus. So it creates a new aux track over here. And what I'm going to do is rename that track, and I'll call it Reverb. And then I can add the effect to the aux track. So I'll add an audio effect. I'll go down to Reverb. Here's Chromaverb. Let's open that up, show details. And just like in the other effects plugins, like I was talking about before, you can click here, and you can show presets inside of the plugin, or you can customize the existing settings, or in the case of Chromaverb, you can click the room type here, and you can choose all of those different types of reverbs that Chromaverb has. So I'm going to use the synth hall for this. And for now, I'm just going to close that out. Let's go back to the mixer. So how do we get signal over to the reverb? Well, your send knob, or your send level, is right here. So you just click on that, and you can pull that up. So here's my shaker. Here's my reverb. And maybe I want the white noise to go over to the reverb as well. So I'll add another send, go to bus. I can use that reverb bus. And maybe I want the chimes of Utopia to go over this as well. So sends and aux tracks are a great way to have shared time-based effects like reverbs and delays. Beat Breaker is a new audio effects plugin in Logic for iPad. This is a time and pitch morphing plugin that allows you to easily chop up and reshuffle loops, samples, and even software instruments. This reminds me a lot of Stutter Edit from iZotope, but it's in a format that's much easier and more tactile to use. And because it's an audio effect, you can drop it on any track, and then just using your fingers, you can create new and interesting chopped up and resampled sounds. Let's check it out. So on this loop, I want to add Beat Breaker, so I'll add an audio effect here. This is under your multi-effects. So you've got your fat effects, remix effects, step effects, and now Beat Breaker. Let's open that up. And what this does is it sort of chops up and slices up your audio signal, and you can set this to different divisions. So 4 beats, 2 beats, 8 beats. So right now, this is 4 beats of music. And you can apply time, repeat, and volume operations to this. So time operations will essentially replace the clip or the slice at that point. So for example, if I wanted, slice 2 here to be a repeat of slice 1, I could pull it down here. So I have 2 kicks now. If I put it back where it was before, that was the default. If I pull it up, if I want to speed this up, I can select 2 beats, so now each of the slices is a bit faster. You can use repeat functions. So the repeat function is sort of like a note repeater function, and then volume is, fairly self-explanatory. It's just a volume adjustment. And there are different presets you can pick from down here. However, if you click here, you can show presets, and you can see all of the plugin presets built into Beat Breaker. And then I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another loop to this. Yeah, so it's adding a few extra pitches at the end of the bass line. And again, without it, it sounds like this. So again, Beat Breaker is an incredibly creative tool. It's very tactile. You can, again, if you have your iPad in your lap, you can just pull up and down the different slices in real time and play around and recycle and resample your loops. And because this is an audio effect, this will work for audio, it'll work for loops, it'll work for samples, and it'll work for software instruments. So you can add it to just about any type of track. Sample Alchemy is a new software instrument that allows you to transform audio samples into custom instruments that you can perform with your fingertips. Drop in any looper sample, set start points for playback, and then use the keyboard or your MIDI controller to play your custom instrument. This is a really awesome new sound manipulation tool, unlike anything I've used before. You can find Sample Alchemy under the Sampler category, along with Quick Sampler and Sampler. So what Sample Alchemy does is it allows you to drag and drop in any sample, then you have tactile control over the start points of the sample. You can play it back with your MIDI controller, or you can play it back using the built-in keyboard on the iPad. Yeah, let's try this plucked texture. And so when you have samples like this that have a bit more variation to them, you can set different start points, and all of these will be played at the same time. And then if you want to play around with each of the points, you just select that point, or you can select it here, source A, source B, D, C. So each source is sort of functioning like an oscillator or a sample oscillator. And then you can apply granular, additive, or spectral synthesis to this. I'm clipping a bit, so let's pull down the channel. And let's add some reverb to this to give it some more ambience. So again, Sample Alchemy is a really creative way to have complete tactile control over custom sample instruments. It's just a really fantastic way and one of the most creative ways I've seen in recent times to create your own unique sample instruments. If you don't have a MIDI controller to use with Logic for iPad, you'll definitely want to check out the different play surfaces. These include a keyboard that can be scale locked, drum pads for recording beats, a guitar fretboard, and guitar strips. But the play surface I want to focus on mainly are the chord strips. Prior to Logic for iPad, the only way to use these in Logic was with Logic Remote. But now you can use these right inside of Logic, and they're a great way to enter in full chords with a single tap of your finger. Now, to record in my Sample Alchemy instrument, I could use my MIDI controller. I could click down here to open up the keyboard, and I could play in here as well. One of the cool things about the built-in keyboard is you can actually scale lock it. So if you click here, you can activate the scale lock, and then you can choose a key. So if I only want notes for C natural minor, I can totally do that. So it's only going to give me a C minor scale. But playing it on a keyboard like this on iPad is not exactly the most it's pretty intuitive, but it's not the easiest thing to do. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use a different play surface, and you can do that by clicking over here. So you have your keyboard, you have drum pads for your drum instruments, you have a guitar fretboard, you have guitar strips, but the main one I'm going to be using here is chord strips. This allows you to play whole chords, and you can set the key so all of the chords can be diatonic. Now, right now, this is set to C major. So my song right now is in C minor. So in order to change the strips, I'm going to come up to my key up here and click, and I'm going to change the key from C major to C minor, and you'll see that the chord strips change to match the key of the song. Now, the way the chord strips work is the notes at the bottom of the strip are individual like bass tones. And then each of these are individual triads in different inversions. So you can use higher or lower inversions. So let's try that. I'm not exactly sure what chords to play, but let's try this out. And what that does is it plays in whole chords. So I can open this up in the MIDI editor, and you'll see that it doesn't just enter in one note, kind of like the chord trigger would. Now, it looks to me like my quantization value is going to be a half note. So I'm going to go over to my inspector here, and with that region selected, go to quantize and select a half note. Now, all of my notes have been quantized. So let's hear what this sounds like in context. Let's go ahead and just cycle that. Maybe pull it back in the mix a bit. With Logic Pro for iPad, you can record audio with a microphone or a DI instrument like electric guitar or bass. You can connect just about any USB core audio device, so most audio interfaces are natively supported. I'll also demonstrate how to record into take folders, just like the Mac version. However, one drawback is that you cannot use quick swipe comping on the iPad. Although you can move your projects over to a Mac and complete the quick swipe comping there. Now, for recording audio, the first thing you want to do is make sure, again, that you have your audio interface set up properly. So again, under the settings, under audio, make sure that your audio interface is selected as the input device. You may also want to change the buffer size to the lowest setting for recording. And you can also choose to auto-select audio devices. So what this will do is it'll just automatically detect any audio interface that you plug in. So I'm good there. I have a microphone plugged into input 2 on my Symphony desktop. So what I'm going to do is create a new audio track here. And for this audio track, I'm not going to use any audio patches, but what I do want to do is I want to go to the track options here, and I'm going to click at the top. And this is where you can adjust your audio routing, your input and output on that track. So if I go to input, what I can do is I can change the format of this track to mono, and then I can change the input to input 2 where my microphone is selected. So that's how you can set your inputs and your track format. And then I can just click on this track. Let's rename it. And then to record, all I have to do is record, enable the track, and then I can either hit R to record or I can hit record at the top. Now here's the thing. Overlapping audio recordings will automatically be packed into a take folder, just like in Logic for Mac. The downside is you do not have access to quick swipe comping like you do in Logic for Mac. However, if you record all of the takes here on iPad and then you move your project over to your Mac, you can still have access to those take folders, and you then have access to quick swipe comping. So you can still do quick swipe comping, you just have to take the project off of the iPad and bring it over to a Mac. Okay, so I've got my mic hooked up. I'm going to just basically hit record, and I'm going to sing in a couple takes of this song. Again, bear with me. I'm not the best singer in the world. And what I'll do is I'll show you a simple way of using the split tool to create basic composite takes, even though we don't have quick swipe comping here.
Tell me how you love me, tell me that you need me, tell me that I'm everything you want me to be. Tell me that you feel this, tell me that you need this. You've got it bad, you've got it bad, so bad, so bad.
Okay, so now to do another take, I'm just going to record right on top of this, and it's going to store both takes in a take folder.
Tell me how you love me, tell me that you need me, tell me that I'm everything you want me to be. Show me that you feel this, girl, I got your weakness. You've got it bad, you've got it bad, so bad, so bad.
Okay, so part of that take was good, part of that take had some wrong lyrics in it. One thing you can do is you can tap on the region, tap again, and then go to takes and folders, and you can jump back and forth between the first take and the second take. So what I want to do is I want to use the first take for most of this, and then there's two spots in the middle where I want to bring in the second take. Now, the way you can do this without quick swipe comping is you're going to use the split tool, and the split tool is basically like the scissors tool in Logic for Mac. You drag this around, and then you swipe down, and you can cut the region at different points. So I'll do the same thing here, and then I can just delete these extra regions. Now let's listen to that again. And what I'm going to do is listen in for the spot where I made the mistake.
Tell me how you love me, tell me that you need me, tell me that I'm everything you want me to be.
Now, that's pretty out of tune there. Again, I apologize for my bad vocal performance, but let's cut that right there.
Tell me that you feel this. Tell me that you need this. You've got it bad. You've got.
And then one more right here. So again, I'll just use the split tool, drag down. So this whole part here, so I guess basically I'm using more of take 2 than take 1. But what I can do now is I can tap on this, go to take folders, and switch this over to take 2. So it's going to be take 1, then take 2, then take 1 again. So let's give that a shot.
Tell me how you love me. Tell me that you need me. Tell me that I'm everything you want me to be. Show me that you feel this. Girl, I got your weakness. You've got it bad. You've got it bad, so bad, so bad.
Now, again, like I said before, you can take this project and you can move it into Logic for Mac, and you can still use quick swipe comping. The take folders will still be there. But if you want to flatten down your takes into new audio regions, you simply tap again, and then you go to takes and folders and you select flatten. So that's just going to, basically get rid of all other takes other than the selected takes. You can totally do that here if you want to. And in the compressor, you've got all of your different compression circuits, just like you have in Logic for Mac. So here I'm using the vintage Opto, and I can go ahead and add reverb to my vocal as well, using the same reverb bus I created earlier. So what I'll do here is on my vocal track, I'll create a new send, go to bus, choose the reverb bus, click on the amount, pull that up.
Tell me how you love me. Tell me that you need me. Tell me that I'm everything you want me to be. Show me that you feel this. Girl, I got your weakness. You've got it bad. You've got it bad, so bad, so bad.
So not the best vocal performance ever, but it's a proof of concept. I think you get the point. So as long as you have a core audio USB audio interface, you can hook it up to the iPad and you can do site recordings. You can do recordings on the fly. You can bring this out to musicians and collaborators' houses and work with them, where they are, instead of asking them to come to you. I already have some sessions lined up where I'm going to be taking the iPad along with my Symphony desktop and a microphone to go do some recording sessions in a completely different state. And again, this is just a really portable and convenient way to make audio recordings. Just like with Logic for Mac, you can add a final mastering effects chain on your stereo output and bounce your final mix. You can also export all tracks as audio files if you're moving over to another DAW, or if you just prefer working with audio multi-tracks for mixing. Now, let's say you're ready to sort of finalize the project and export the project. You can add audio effects to the stereo output, just like you can in Logic for Mac. So maybe I want to pull up the adaptive limiter. Maybe I want to add a little bit more loudness to this. Maybe I want to set the output ceiling to -1.
Tell me how you love me. Tell me that you need me. Tell me that I'm everything you want me to be. Show me that you feel this.
And then once you've added all of your effects on your stereo out, in order to export, what you're first going to do is set the cycle range around the area that you want to export. You're going to click up here, and then you're going to click Export. And this will bring up your export dialog. So you can give this a name. I'll just call this Logic Pro for iPad Demo. You can choose to bounce the entire project length, or if you uncheck this, it'll use the start and end position of the cycle range. You can choose between an uncompressed and a compressed file. There are other processing details over here as well. You can include your audio tail, normalize, and you can choose to bypass your Master Effects plugins. And then when you're done, you just click Share, and this bounces the project within the cycle range. Now, if you want to export the entire project as multi-tracks, what you're going to do is turn off the cycle range, go back to the export options, and a new option will show up here, export all tracks as individual audio files. So you can click on that, and that will export all of your tracks as multi-tracks, so you can bring these over to another DAW for mixing, or maybe you just want to output audio. You don't want to work with MIDI when you bring these back into Logic for Mac. Logic Pro for iPad and Logic Pro for Mac are cross-compatible. You can easily migrate a project to and from your iPad using AirDrop or iCloud. You can start a project on your iPad and then move it over to your Mac to finish, or if you need more portability and you need to work on a project on the go, you can move a project you started on your Mac over to the iPad. Let me show you how to do this. Now, if you're all done with the project on the iPad and you want to bring it over to Logic for Mac, all you got to do is click the back button here. This will bring you back to your recents. And what you can do is just click and hold on this and then select Share. And then you can AirDrop it. You can add it to iCloud. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click Carney's Mac Studio here, and I'm going to AirDrop this over to my Mac Studio. And here I can see that the project has been transferred over to my Mac Studio. I can double click to open this up in Logic for Mac, and you can see that everything is here. So here's the thing. I'm a professional music producer and mixing engineer. I do this for a living. Am I going to abandon my mixing rig and switch over to doing everything on an iPad? No, absolutely not. I see this as a really convenient way to do site recordings, drive out to musicians' houses or home studios and record them there, make live recordings. Maybe I'm traveling and I just want to get some ideas down. I want to build some beats in my free time. So for me personally, I don't see myself finishing an entire project only on the iPad, but the ability to migrate projects to and from the iPad is a huge plus. But this brings me to a couple last points about compatibility. What about third-party plugins? From my understanding, Logic Pro for iPad supports version 3 AU component plugins that are available on the App Store. So right now, the number of plugins available is fairly limited. However, there are options available from FabFilter, Eventide, and Baby Audio, as well as a few others. And I'm sure the number of plugins available will only grow from here on out. So if you're using a bunch of third-party plugins and they're not installed on your iPad, if you migrate over your projects to iPad, you won't be able to use those plugins. That's just the way things work. Even if I were to take a project on one computer and move it over to an identical computer that doesn't have my plugins, the plugins aren't going to work. So that's just how third-party plugins work. One last important talking point has to do with the new plugins, Beat Breaker and Sample Alchemy. At the time of making this video, I'm not aware that these plugins will be available for the Mac version of Logic Pro, and I'm sure by the time this video is posted, this question might already be answered. But my understanding at this point is that there will be a Logic Pro for Mac update the day of launch or shortly after, where it includes an update for additional sound library content that's only on iPad, as well as compatibility plugins for Beat Breaker and Sample Alchemy. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to use those plugins on Mac, but again, my understanding at this point is that there will be some sort of cross-compatibility addressed for these plugins in a future Logic update. You should at some point be able to start a project on iPad, use Beat Breaker and Sample Alchemy, bring the project over to Mac, and still have those sounds available. Now, I'm not 100% privy to all of this information, so I'm just telling you what I'm currently aware of at the time of making this video. Okay, so those are all of the main new features in Logic Pro for iPad. Obviously, there are a lot of other things you can do with Logic for iPad. And again, most of the Mac features are there. So I'm really happy to see this isn't a toy. It's not a glorified version of GarageBand or some dumbed down version of Logic. It's a serious music making tool, but completely portable and optimized for touch. If you like this video, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content and tutorials like this. Let me know in the comments below what you think about Logic for iPad, what you'd like to see from me, if you would like to see more tutorials for Logic for iPad. If you want to support the habit, I do have a Patreon page that helps me out with the cost of operating this channel, keeping the business afloat. And if not, no worries, it's no big deal. A simple like and subscribe will suffice. Thank you so much for the support, and thanks for watching.